Now, in this video, I'm going to just work through kind of my process of how I would design and visualize a lamp design that you're doing for your year 12 work. So, the first thing I would do is I would have the extra toolbars open. So, again, if you haven't got them open, just select the large tool set. So, just show you again. So, view toolbars and then large tool set. Just in case you do need to kind of add those extra bits in there, it will just allow you to design a little bit easier. The first thing I'd probably do is start off with the base that I wanted to use, and just get it to a size that I'm happy with. If you do want it to be completely square, again in the bottom right you can actually write the measurements if you want it to be an exact size. So I could do 250 and then comma 250 and push enter. What that will do is it will create a 250mm by 250mm shape to start with. It can be really useful just to start with the rough kind of measurement that you want to use on there, because then the rest of your design will then follow that kind of sizing, and you don't end up with your design sort of being absolutely massive. So it can be helpful to start with a kind of basic size to start with. Again, you could always start making it larger and then scale it down if you wanted to, but I'm going to start with it smaller. Offset it. I'm going to set my offset to, I'm going to do 20mm, and then I'm going to pull this up. I'm probably going to go, let's go, I'm going to go 15mm up, and this is just the design for my kind of base piece that I've got on there. For my design, I want to have a kind of circle shape. Now, because I quite like referencing in this, and I want to create it as like a separate component, so this base piece is its own component. So what I'm going to do is select my base piece and make it a component. So I'm going to call this lamp base. And don't forget to add these separate components, because otherwise it can become a little bit tricky to try and separate your parts once they're all assembled together, because it's really hard to select individual faces, because some of the faces you can't see because they're stuck to another face. So Sketchup will naturally try and like glue your parts together if you draw them on there, but because this is a separate component now, my parts won't be accidentally joined together. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking the midpoint of the component and midpoint of component, and then I'm using this to then draw my, I'm going to do like an acrylic circle that's going to go on here. Okay, I'm going to offset this because then I can choose how big I want this circle to be. So I'll do my offset. I'll rub out my lines first though, because it keeps wanting to just offset that individual triangle. And then I'm going to choose my offset. I'm probably going to do, let's do 30mm, see how that looks. That's a little bit small. So again, you can always visualize and change things. I'll try 25. We'll set it to that. And just move that up like so. And then because you're using acrylic, the acrylic is 3mm thick that we'll be using, so I'll set that to 3mm. Again, it just helps you visualize it. Now I need to think about how I'm going to have my kind of acrylic held together. So I'm actually going to have separate poles or rods that are going to go up. So what I want to do is I want to put holes in my acrylic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the end point, so this point here, and what I'm basically going to do is draw a line across to this midpoint over this side. So I'll zoom out and just turn the camera around just so that I can look at it this side, and I'll line it up here, and then this is kind of my middle point that I'm going to draw my circle on. So I'm going to line it up with this point here and put my circle there. Now, it can be quite hard to get these sort of all lined up. So what I tend to do, and a bit of a tip, is if you select your circle shape, so the circle you want, that's going to go, I'm going to have mine in 4 positions, so I've got to add another 3. So rather than copying and pasting and then trying to guess where I put them to make them look right, what I do is I use the rotate tool. So select your circle, and I'm going to select the inside and outside of the circle, and then we're going to use the rotate tool, and I'm going to put this right in the middle, and you'll see the midpoint because I've got the midpoint of this line here. When you start rotating it, you'll see that it moves, but if you push the control button, which is the one that's at the bottom left of your keyboard, it says CTRL, that's the control key. If you tap that, what it does is it copies at the same time, so it means that you can actually rotate an object round whilst copying it. So it means that I can actually make sure that the same component is equally spaced. You can actually type the measurements if you want to, so we're changing it by 90 degrees each time. So you could type 90. For mine, I can actually see it in the bottom right here. When I get to the right position, it's 90 anyway, because I line it up with each of them. And it does naturally lock onto 90, because they quite like getting to the correct degrees. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to extrude downwards, and I'm going to use, basically I want it to cut all the way through. So again, you'll see that it goes on face a component, and you should see that it wants to get rid of it, because I actually want to delete that. Okay, and again, most of these things are visual, but I like them to look more realistic in how it's actually going to look for my real design, because it gives me a much better idea of what I'm going to create, and I can sort of see problems before they arise. That's kind of the point of this, is you want to see things that aren't quite right. And because I have actually already offset this, sorry, not offset, I've made this into a component. What I can do is hold down Shift, select the base, and now the only thing I've got selected is my component here. So I'm going to get rid of this middle line here before I do that. And so what I'm going to do is select everything, hold down Shift, and then deselect the center, which is our base. Then make component, and I'm going to call this acrylic shade, perhaps. Shade, and then that's its own component now. So what I can do in a minute is I'm actually going to copy and paste this. What I want to do first though is I want to add the kind of metal rods that I'm going to put in here. So I'm going to draw a circle here. Not sure if it's going to let me offset these because they're a separate component now, so I have to draw the circle in the middle. What you might have to do is draw, like if you're going to do this sort of thing, you might have to draw a line from here to here, or just kind of figure out where the circle is. You can sort of find the middle point. It will try and find it, but you do need to move the mouse around a little bit to find that. So if you sort of move it around roughly near where the middle point is, or if you like go to the edge of the component to sort of highlight that you want to find the circle's midpoint, so you sort of make sure the mouse has touched the circle, and then if you move it to the middle, it should try and find the middle point. And then I'm just making sure that mine line up with there. So touch the circle and then middle point, because then it knows that that's the middle point you want to find. And again, middle point, middle of the circle. And then what I'll do is I should then be able to extrude these up, and I can choose how high I want them to go. So, you know, let's say I'll make it 130 millimeters maybe. Okay. And then I'll select this one, and I can actually just select the top of this, so it will naturally want to go to the top of these, and they should all be the same height. Now before I do anything else or add any more components, I'm going to select the whole thing, Shift to deselect the base, deselect the ring in the middle, and then I'm going to make these a component. So make component, and I'm going to call them poles. These would probably be metal, so I'll call them metal rods. Okay, like so. So metal rods, create. So they're their own component. what I can now do is if I select my circle, let's say, there's two options. You can either copy and paste, so Control and V, Control C, and then sort of try and line it up. I like to do it a different way, which is if you use the Move tool, same as you did with the Rotate with the circle, you can move this up, and then what you do is you just push Control at the same time. So if I undo that because I want to keep it in position, I'm going to do my camera, standard view, and front. What I'm now going to do is move this up. Okay, so I'm on the blue axis. If I push Control, you should see that it's actually copied that component. And then I can actually choose how far apart I want them to be. So I might set them to be 20 millimeters. Move this again, Control, 20. Move this again, Control, 20. And you'll see that it just keeps allowing me to copy and move them upwards. And because I'm always locking them to the blue axis, it means that I don't end up with them sort of moving to places I don't want them to. And then escape there, and then you should see that I've got my components all on here. The only issue I've got is that the component seems to have it's actually left a part in there, so I don't want this middle bit. So if I double click on my component, I can actually select that middle bit, and what's quite nice of this is if I delete it, you'll see that it deletes it from every component, because all the components like share the same properties. So if I change the size of one of them, it actually changes the size of all of them. So it does make changing them much easier as well. And as well, if I wanted to make this a bit thicker, it will make them all thicker. If I want to make it thinner, and etc., you get the idea. But it does make it much easier to make changes to your design as well. So then if I wanted to change these rods, I can actually change the rods. If I wanted to change the base now, I could go back and change the base. So if I wanted to make this a bit more exciting with having like curves or something like that on the edge, I could do that. So I could round these edges off and just make them a bit more exciting than just as they are at the moment. But that is how I would go about designing my sort of lamp in this way. You could always cut through to show like perhaps you would drill a hole through the base here. So I could now edit this, and I might add a circle here, which perhaps I've decided I'm going to drill through. I might have that go through, and then I might drill a hole in the base here, so I could line them up with each other. And the idea then is I could run the wires through the middle, so it means I don't have to have the wires visible or whatever. There's loads of options that you can go for, but it just means that you can figure out your design a bit more and make it a little bit more visual. And then in the next video I'm going to show you how to add textures to this and just make it look a little bit more realistic in the sense of communicating your ideas, so you could show your client what it would actually look like, and it gives them a better idea of actually what's going on here.